Hello, and thank you for participating in the Site Supervisor Training, where we'll talk about working with graduate counseling practicum and internship students for the clinical mental health counseling programs and the marriage, couple, and family programs at WKU. The practicum and internship experiences are key parts of the counseling students' plan program in completing their degree requirements, as well as helping them develop the knowledge, skills, mentorship, and experience needed to become competent and skilled practitioners. Therefore, the department values its relationships with the community agencies that fulfill the need for practicum and internship placements. And we thank you for your interest in being a part of our clinical training experience. First, a brief overview of what the supervision training includes. You'll see we'll give you a brief overview, provide some resources, and talk about the expectations and requirements of each of the roles, whether they're students, the faculty supervisor, site supervisor, clinical site, or the clinical coordinator. We'll also talk about some supervision models and how you might use those, and the ethical issues that would be involved in supervision. So when looking at the overall counseling clinical experience, clinical supervision is really crucial in preparing competent counselors to work in a demanding and complex world. Without you providing supervision experiences at your site, our counseling students are just not going to get the hands-on training to be able to apply the knowledge and skills that they've started with in the graduate program. And experience alone may not be sufficient in becoming a competent supervisor. So it's not correlated with higher levels of supervisor development, and this is why we offer additional supervisor training, because many times in a graduate level program, practitioners are not getting training in supervision. Therefore, it's helpful to understand a few key roles of supervision, the models, and some of the recommendations. And unfortunately, inadequate supervision can actually harm the supervisee. So we're concerned not only with the development and the growth of our counselors, but our concern is for also doing no harm to the supervisee who might be with an untrained supervisor. So the clinical program, student, supervisor, and site requirements for the Department of Counseling and Student Affairs, they're aligned with the CACREP 2016 standards. So you may see some of our requirements, and if you feel they're restrictive, they're really just aligned with the standards that we must meet to make sure our students are graduating from a CACREP accredited program. And for licensure, that's a requirement in Kentucky, and it is moving in that direction in a lot of other states. So the purpose of the counseling clinical experience is really to develop students' professional counselor identities, which is why we ideally prefer them to work with a licensed professional counselor or licensed marriage and family therapist, which is kind of the focus of our program. However, they can also work with social workers or psychologists, other therapists who are qualified and trained, but we really want our students to develop their professional counselor identities based on the populations they work with and the field in which they practice. We also want to allow them to practice their knowledge theory, skills, and abilities under supervision. And that can be direct supervision, it can kind of be indirect supervision by watching videos and discussing the theories or how they're applying their skills and developing conceptualizations over clients, but definitely under supervision is required, not only at the intern level, but obviously for a few years with the provisional license as well. They learn about competencies, skills, and ethical standards, and we definitely want them to experience that gray area, if you will, when it's difficult because you have a client from different circumstances. So exploring those are really helpful, and you can only really do that when you're in practice at a clinical site. And then, of course, we want to provide students the opportunity to counsel clients who represent ethnic and diverse backgrounds. So the overall counseling experience requires a number of hours. And for the on-site hours in a clinical setting, they should be working directly with clients, not just observing. Now, they may be able to observe kind of in the beginning, and we'll talk more about the direct versus indirect hours. But overall, for their practicum, they should have 100 total hours, and that includes 40 direct hours with clients. And that is typically taken over the summer. For internship, they should have 300 hours each semester, totaling 120 direct hours for each semester as well, and that happens over the fall, spring. So most of our students will start in the summer, they'll end the following late April, early May, and they will complete a total of 700 hours, including the 280 direct hours. Now that does qualify for Kentucky licensure, but in some neighboring states like Indiana or Florida, they may be required to have a total of 1,000 hours for application for licensure, and so they can work with the clinical coordinator and the site to either accumulate those hours within that 1 year, or they can take an additional practicum over the following summer to complete the additional 300 hours, and they'll just work with the clinical coordinator. They also are required to have weekly individual or triadic supervision, and we'll go over more of that during the expectations for site supervisors, but that is expected to be kind of a scheduled 1 hour each week. And they'll be scheduled for weekly group supervision, which is the university class, and that's an hour and a half each week. So for the 300-hour total, it ends up being about 20 hours a week for their internship to get, for across the 15 weeks. So there's 2.5 hours of that will be supervision. So about 17.5 hours would be required to be on site seeing clients. Some students may need to be on site a little bit more because the no-show rate might be high, but others who especially work at a residential facility may not have that issue, and they can get their hours within that. So I just want to make a note that marriage, couple, and family counseling students must complete at least 30 of their hours of direct service in a relational modality. So that means couples, families, other like grandchild, grandfather, siblings, parent, child, whatever. And so that would include 12 of the 40 direct hours, or for internship, that would be 36 of the 120 direct hours. And that is a requirement for LMFT licensure. So that is not necessarily a specific cake rep requirement, but it is for licensure if they choose to pursue that. So the clinical hours, I'll give you a brief description. So the direct contact hours is the direct service with clients. They can be doing initial intakes, individual, group counseling. They could do psychoeducational groups, family, couples. They should not just be observing. So maybe at the beginning of their practicum, they can sit in and observe, but technically that would be indirect hours because they're not actually engaging in counseling. That would almost be like putting a videotape in and watching and learning and growing their skills and understanding what's happening, but it's not actually direct contact where they're working with the client. So everything else typically falls into indirect hours. And this is everything else that would be expected of a licensed counselor. So we're not asking them to do paperwork and coffee and insurance, except like in some cases, the therapist is doing that for them. And so making sure that if they're doing those professional activities, that would include consultation, family consultation. So again, working with the client and in service to the client. So if they're consulting about the family, but they're consulting with other colleagues, that would be indirect. If they're consulting with the parent and the child is in the room, so it's kind of a collaborative environment, that could be direct hours. So it's really about the client versus the non-client, being there and being involved in the setting with the intern. And so that could also mean record keeping, treatment planning, assessment instruments, supervision, phone calls, licensure applications, insurance, and stuff like that. So giving the intern a chance to really understand the full spectrum of what happens within a private or group or agency practice is great experience for them. And so while supervision counts as kind of that indirect, it's really going to be calculated in the logs separately. And the logs are designed to calculate the hours based on the needs or what is the boxes that need to be filled out on the Kentucky licensure form. So when supervision is looked at, it's going to be broken down into individual and group. And so the supervision is the time spent with the faculty or site supervisors discussing like the individual development as a counselor and them as a counselor, or the interactions with the client and how they might be able to assist the client. So that individual can be conducted as dyadic or triadic. So one supervisor can work with 1 or 2 supervisees, but no more than that. It cannot be a group staffing. The ideal format for supervision is a face-to-face, which includes a review of videotape sessions, and we really encourage our students to record more than they need for their required class. So that they can watch the tapes themselves and learn from them, but also bring them to you throughout the weeks and not just prepare them for a case presentation in front of the class. And so, but I do want to remind people that consultation in passing is not a viable option to that scheduled supervision. So students may be able to pop in and ask questions throughout, and we really encourage that, but at the same time, they should be meeting for a minimum of an hour each week for the individual or triadic supervision. Now, group supervision is that weekly time spent in the supervision class for an average of an hour and a half each week. Regular on-site staffing meetings are not typical to count as group site supervision, but if you are providing those for your intern on-site, then they can count separately. So the LPCA for Kentucky, the application has individual site and university, and then they also have group supervision. Typically, our interns will have site individual supervision, which requires the site supervisor to be on site with them, and then they will do university group supervision, which is the university class. However, they also may have a little bit of the additional, they may have university individual supervision if they've requested additional support from the supervisor, from the faculty supervisor or the clinical coordinator, but then they might also have the group at the site, which might be those additional staffings depending on the way your site is set up. So the details of the direct hours, the number of hours, the expectations, a lot of that is on the resources clinical webpage, where you'll see a link to the Practicum and Internship manual that describes a lot of this in more detail, as well as additional things like establishing and maintaining a site. You'll also see a link to the approved site information form, an approved list of all of the sites, and then the detailed information about each site. This not only helps the intern who is at the site, but the new interns that are looking at a variety of sites to apply, but also current interns and professionals to see the services and contacts at a variety of other sites, so that in the event that they might need to refer clients, they can go there as a great resource as well. We do have an internship and job fair every spring, and we started doing that to connect our professional site supervisors with our incoming practicum students as well as our graduates. And so this is a great opportunity if you'd like to be involved. We'll reach out to you probably with the save the date somewhere around November, December, and then starting to get RSVPs and have that probably somewhere in early to mid-February, as the practicum students have just gone through the orientation and are preparing to apply for our internship. So the typical cycle for that is that at the beginning of February, the practicum students will go through an orientation. They will have kind of a site supervisor panel and internship and job fair. And then by March 1st, they need to indicate that they actually intend to apply to a practicum site, and that by May 1st, they actually have to have their practicum site selected and the site supervisor contract signed. So they really have kind of that between mid-February to the end of April to apply and to interview and to make those decisions. So that hopefully that gives you an idea. And although many of our interns can change from one site to another and between the summer and fall semesters, some sites do require a year commitment because they want kind of a long-term established relationship with clients. So the interns are looking ahead at booking a year in advance. So even if there is a fall spring internship that doesn't have a summer practicum to it, they will be looking still in mid to late spring just to kind of set that up in advance so they can make that decision and have that plan. There's also a list of the clinical paperwork required by the practicum or internship, as well as there's some additional paperwork like permission to video record forms and things like that that are provided as a support. We ask the students to follow your policies and procedures. If you have informed consent forms or permission to video forms, then go ahead and use that, but we also have options as well. But these are the forms that are required for them. And so for site supervisors, you will be filling out the evaluation of student performance for the midterm and the final evaluation. The students are aware that it is their responsibility to make sure and get you that form. We also have a list of departmental policies below that, and you can see the dates and deadlines on the right side. Now we'll talk about the expectations and requirements. Now these are all listed in the practicum and internship manual, and if you have any questions related to any of them, you're always welcome to reach out to the faculty supervisor or the clinical coordinator. So let's talk about students first. They're required to attend a university practicum orientation. This is where they'll go over the paperwork, talk about the expectations for reaching out, and if they want to establish a new site, what the expectations and requirements are for that. They'll also be required to participate in the weekly scheduled group supervision class. And within that class, they will have to prepare 2 case presentations with videos that include the clients each semester. Now, if your clients have concerns about being on videotape, they can record from behind the client, or they can record just the intern. Now, we would love to get the whole picture to where we can see the interaction between the two. However, if clients are concerned, or if you're at a site where you're not able to record the clients, or you have confidentiality concerns with minors, then again, you can limit how much video is shown of the client. Now, we encourage them to record more than just 2 videos each semester, and certainly not wait until the last minute in case of a client no-show, because that has happened. And so we would love you as a site supervisor to ensure that you're watching these videos throughout the semester to help them with their skills and point out some areas where they can continue to grow. What we found is that many times the self-report doesn't always match our perspective of growth and strength areas. And so that's where having just another perspective from the outside could be very helpful in increasing the self-awareness of their counseling skills. Also, they need to schedule and attend weekly individual or triadic supervision with the site supervisor. So we want them to be prepared to show the video of the client sessions, to discuss any concerns. And those concerns could be focused on the client, they could be focused on the counselor development, they can especially be focused on any countertransference issues. We want a great relationship to be developed so that they can come to you with any concern and fears, and then you can help them work through that. And so that would be ideal. They also are, of course, required to complete and submit all clinical paperwork and assignments on time. So the assignments are the 2 case presentations for the class. If you have any assignments or projects, they would be required to do those as well. And some sites may have a project for this semester that they want their intern to complete, and that could be research on the client population. It could be to develop a psychoed group. It could be to work any program that you might have them do that's really related to kind of the counseling experience. And then they're required to notify the site supervisor in advance of upcoming deadlines and requirements, as well as any absences or concerns that might take them away from the office or the client's setting in the event of an emergency or death or an illness. They're also required to complete and log the required direct, indirect, and supervision hours, and make arrangement with the site supervisor and the clinical coordinator to complete them at another time if approved. Like, ideally, they will be completing these within the semester, and they will have worked out a system, but occasionally we get a number of students that by certain sites might be a little tight on hours, and so they'll work with us to take an incomplete and work over the holiday break or work over the summer break or whatever to complete those final hours before they get a final grade for that course. And so they'll just need to work with us on doing that. But there is a log that's provided, and they can keep our logs of their direct, indirect, and supervision hours each week. They will sign it and have the site supervisor sign it. So that gives you an opportunity to see where they're spending their time, where they're short, and then they have a summary log at the beginning of that spreadsheet that totals where they're at. And so they can see that if they're at the halfway point, they should be there at the halfway point with their total hours as well. And if they're not, hopefully they're checking in with you. And if they're not doing so, you can ask where they're at, so that we're going to ask as a responsibility of the site supervisors to make sure that they're being able to get enough hours and balance their client load. So a few additional requirements are to maintain professional liability insurance. The clinical coordinator will ensure that that's being maintained and on file, but if you would like to keep a copy for your own records, that's not a bad idea. There will also be expected to attend a national or state and local conference during their full internship experience. So they can attend one each semester, local or state, or they can just attend that one National American Counseling Association conference, and it will count for both of those. So we do ask that you provide some flexibility in allowing the students to attend those conferences, because we're looking at the larger experience of not just the individual professional development, educational part, but also the networking and the other pieces that go into this. And we're hoping to introduce them to that world and potentially network for future jobs as well, and future colleagues and referrals. And we also expect them to wear professional dress and behave as expected. So in our department, we encourage them to avoid distracting clothing, jewelry, or perfume that could be off-putting or distracting to the clients, because we really want the focus to be on the client and not self-expression. And we also expect them to dress professionally and behave as you would expect as well. So there is an expectation that they follow your policies, especially if yours are more strict than ours. But if for some reason you might have more lax policies, then that's okay, but we still expect them to follow our policies as well and err on the side of being a little bit more professional and conservative if they have any question at all. Finally, we ask them to seek out supervision or consultation as needed to address the personal and professional development and or client issues. So if they have questions or concerns throughout the day, they can kind of stop in and ask, not only use the site supervisor questions, but if there are other licensed therapists in the area that might specialize, hopefully they'll go to them in addition to just asking about that in their supervision. We also want them to be proactive in their supervision, but as we'll talk about in the supervision models, their level of proactiveness might be different as they develop, but it's also going to be defined by you as a site supervisor. So if you're encouraging, your students to just come to you when they have questions, they may not know what questions to ask. They might be afraid to ask them. They may feel stupid and they want to impress you, because there is an evaluation component to this. But if you kind of open that door for them early and help them realize that they need to ask all the questions and allow them that non-judgmental space to come to you when they're experiencing countertransference or fears or anxiety around certain things, or just completely feeling lost, developmentally it could be absolutely appropriate for them to get a lot more support in the beginning, and then that can fall off later. But we really encourage them to seek it out, but we'll encourage you as a site supervisor to make sure and encourage them to do that as well. So the university faculty group supervisor is someone that you will work with potentially in collaboration. So the faculty supervisor is the one that will be leading their university class, and they will be the ones that are kind of overseeing, watching the case studies and working with the students. And any of the interns that have questions or concerns, they could take that to their faculty group supervisor, ask about client issues, and ask for support and help. And so that is really a faculty member or adjunct faculty from the department, and they'll oversee that class for the experience. And so they typically have a doctoral degree or counseling preparation, preferred CACREP accredited. They'll have the relevant experience and credentials or licensure. Of course, they would have relevant supervision training and experience and agree to the supervision contract. So the supervision contract is not only signed by a student and the site supervisor, but that is also signed by the faculty group supervisor and the clinical coordinator. So that is an agreement between all of the parties involved, have those defined roles and responsibilities. And typically those are set up within that site information form for each of the sites. And so the contract is the signed document that kind of indicates that you'll be following all those requirements of the Practicum internship manual, as well as the requirements on the site form that were provided. And then, of course, they will be expected to provide additional individual or triadic supervision for students on an as-needed basis. So as faculty supervisors, we could easily be asked for additional supervision, to watch additional video, for second opinions, and so that is something that can be provided through the university, not only to the student, but also they can be providing additional consultation and supervision to the site supervisor as well. So do not hesitate to reach out to the faculty group supervisor or the clinical coordinator. We're here to help. They will be provided an hour and a half per week of group supervision to all the interns, and that will be class sizes no more than 12. If necessary, they can also provide individual or triadic supervision in addition to that group supervision, but that hour and a half each week is a minimum group supervision. And then, of course, they'll observe student interactions with the clients through the video recordings, through case presentations, as well as potentially individual supervision if asked. And they'll be providing regular feedback to students about their development as counselors. Students during their practicum will also evaluate themselves using a counseling skills form at the beginning, and their peers will also be providing feedback to each other, and the group supervisor is facilitating that, so really encouraging the peer supervision for everybody to share as well. And then, of course, consulting with site supervisors. Like I said, as a site supervisor, you're welcome to consult with the group faculty supervisors regarding the student progress, whether it's positive or negative. We love hearing that students are doing well and they're growing, but of course we certainly need to hear if they're struggling or if there's some challenges. And so you could submit the final and midterm evaluations, or they will be reviewing those midterm and final evaluations and signing those that come in from you. Certainly if you have any questions or concerns, hopefully you'll reach out before those mid or final evaluations as well. So now you as the site supervisor or individual supervisor. So obviously this on-site clinical supervision can benefit both professional staff and the counseling students. It can really be a mutually beneficial experience, and we've heard that from many folks, which is why they continue to take interns. So it obviously provides an opportunity for students to gain the clinical insights from professionals working directly with the same client population, and to learn from counselors that are familiar with the requirements and the demands of your particular agency or your group practice, of your population, of the insurance requirements that are relative to that area, to the licensure, to the education requirements. So you're really that expert on the ground, and we rely on you to provide that day-to-day kind of supervision over the practicum or internship students. And so all the clinical sites must have an approved site supervisor that meets the minimum requirements listed in the practicum and internship manual, and those are serving as the primary contact and the individual supervisor for the interns. So really you are that key person, and so they may be able to get other therapists and other support, but you're going to be that primary contact that we reach out to, or that you can reach out to us in the event that there's some concerns or issues. You should have a minimum of a master's degree, preferably in counseling. Again, the counselor identity is important to us, but it can also be a related profession, and relevant credentials or licenses. So we want an active license to practice as an LPCC or LMFT is preferred, because of course the counselor identity role, and then a minimum of 2 years experience in the specialty area which the student is enrolled. And then of course knowledge of the program's expectations, requirements, and evaluation procedures. So that those are all listed in the practicum and internship manual, and they're summarized here in this training. And finally, the relevant training and experience in counseling supervision. So this is providing you a brief overview, but you're more than welcome to reach out to the faculty supervisor, to the clinical coordinator. There are offerings throughout the state now with the LPCCS credential. That is not required to supervise an intern, the LPCCS credential, but it will be required to supervise LPCAs. So that training would also be relevant and count as well. So site supervisors also must agree to the following roles: to review the practicum and internship manual so that you understand the roles and expectations, to complete the supervisor orientation, which is really this PowerPoint presentation, and to provide individual or triadic supervision for at least 1 hour every week. And that should be scheduled once a week, and consistently watching or reviewing videos, or conducting live supervision, or even participating in co-therapy with the student, where you're able to do the co-therapy but also debrief and process that so that they get feedback on that. You're also encouraged to provide regular feedback to students as they develop as counselors, and working with treatment plans and learning the client, providing that helpful feedback to students to become more competent professionals. Also be available on site whenever students are seeing clients. So if students are there doing indirect hours like finishing up paperwork, you do not have to be there. Obviously, if there's a client crisis or any concern, that we definitely need that. And so you should not be sending the intern into a client home or out in the community unless you or another licensed therapist is with them. And when not on site, make sure that there is another licensed therapist that's available and knows that they're responsible for the intern. Then of course, sign and agree the required clinical paperwork. So you'll be signing the supervision contract, the hourly logs, which are weekly, and then again the summary. You'll also be doing the mid and final evaluations. And then discuss this feedback with the students and faculty supervisors upon request. So in the practicum, you can reach out a little bit more to the faculty supervisors and discuss any kind of concerns or questions about the students. But throughout the rest of the internship experience, that if there's just concerns, feel free to reach out. And then of course, serve as a resource and support person for your agency. And that means helping kind of provide that orientation, and making sure that students are aware of the policies and procedures, and that they're building an appropriately balanced caseload so that they can get enough direct hours to meet their requirements and complete the semester on time. And then, of course, work in consultation with the faculty supervisor and clinical coordinator to discuss any concerns. And of course, feel free to take advantage of our consultation and assistance as well. So we can provide, and many of our graduates and site supervisors do call and ask us for support and help. And then, of course, guide the students in obtaining the required direct and indirect hours. Let's talk about evaluation procedures briefly. And so as site supervisor, you'll be asked to evaluate your practicum and internship students on their counseling skills using the evaluation form on the clinical website, which really looks like this here. And so if your intern meets the expectations for their training level, you're encouraged to mark them at a 3. So really the 3 is that satisfactory and it meets expectations for training level. And so we really only encourage you to mark them above if they perform above or well above the expectations. And at that point, you can choose to give them a 4 or 5. And that really helps you highlight those key strengths. If there are areas for growth, you may wish to identify those with a 1 or 2 and provide helpful qualitative feedback that helps them identify the areas where they can further develop. This allows the students to see where they shine, but see where they need to grow. And so you'll also be asked to calculate the average score for the CACREP accreditation reporting and provide helpful comments and suggestions that address their strengths and areas for growth. And this gives interns the objective opinions, but then also the subjective ideas of what they're doing well and where they can improve. So most practicum and internship students are not expected to receive 4s or 5s, as it's really not helpful to them or to us, especially for beginning counselors in training. Therefore, a more intentional approach to rating the student with an average of a 3 where they meet the standards can actually be more useful to them and us. So their academic grade will not be calculated with your numerical rating, but your qualitative feedback may be considered. So really your score will not bring their academic grade down, but it does give them kind of a basic point that they can either grow from or they're already showing that they're doing well. Now we're going to talk about expectations for the clinical site. Now typically the site supervisor represents the site and may be the one to ensure that these are being met. But sometimes there's an administrative or an owner of a business that might not be the site supervisor, but might be filling out the site information form and making sure that these requirements are being met. So one is making sure that the site information form for the organization is maintained on the clinical website. So if there's any updates, changes to the site supervisor, to the address, the contact information, or the population change, then making sure that that information is updated and ensuring that appropriate counseling services are provided on site and available for students. So we talked about earlier about the direct and indirect hours and what counts for those. So you could revisit that section, or they are also listed in the Practicum and Internship Manual. Making sure that there's private settings for individual or group counseling with sufficient space for videotape. So we want to make sure that just like a professional counselor, that the student interns have that private setting and can maintain confidentiality within their counseling settings. They should also identify procedures that ensure the client's confidentiality and legal rights are protected. Practicing counselors are typically maintaining confidentiality and legal rights, but of course this is something that we're expected to address during the site visit through CACREP accreditation and just the state requirements. So students should not be asked to violate any general professional rules of conduct, or there shouldn't be violations of ethical standards or legal practices or any of that. And ensure that student safety is a top priority. Typically this is not an issue for most sites, but in the event of a jail or kind of a neighborhood that might be in an area that may be surrounded, if a student is going to be leaving after dark, then, or if they're going to be in with prisoners, then weapons of any sort should not be stored in the counseling areas. Especially or if they're working with potentially violent clients, they must be closely supervised, and that could be with a guard, with a supervisor, somebody nearby. So we just really want to make sure that there's the safety, and in some cases there could be potentially violent clients, and so restraint training has been given to major staff members, and so if the interns are not undergoing that training, that they at least have the support nearby. And they have an understanding and the procedures of what to do in the event that something happens. Also confirming that prac and internship students can complete the direct and indirect hours required for each experience. So we tell you in advance, and we ask that if you're going to commit to our intern, that you help make sure that they are able to meet those hour requirements and not have to take an incomplete or fail that experience. And so that is an expectation we will discuss with you before we approve the site. Also verify that if you're taking a marriage, couple, and family counseling practicum or internship students, that they can be also guaranteed ample opportunity to get those direct service hours for families or couples. As I mentioned earlier, the 12 for practicum, the 36 for internship, because that will be required for their total hours. Also ensuring that you allow the video recording of clients with the understanding that it will be shared with the individual site supervisor, the faculty supervisor, and the group supervision class, and potentially the clinical coordinator if necessary. If you work primarily with minors that can't be recorded or inpatient folks who are there involuntarily, there are going to be some stipulations to who you may or may not be able to record. So working around that and working with the clinical coordinator can be helpful. And then also guarantee that a qualified on-site supervisor is available on-site when students are seeing clients or another qualified therapist is available. And then providing a well-organized orientation. So similar to kind of some of the information in the site supervisors, because some of these roles might overlap, we just want to make sure the site does have an organized orientation. Any kind of crisis or mandatory report, any of that, we tell them that they absolutely have to go through their site supervisor. They should not be taking any action on their own, but we want to make sure that you go through the procedures with them in advance, and so that they are fully aware. And then, of course, introducing them to the personnel in the agency and understanding who they can go to, who they can request support from, or who they might be able to sit and watch insurance billing or whatever. And finally, the clinical coordinator. The expectation, this person serves as the liaison between the department and all of the site during the practicum and internship experiences. We facilitate the site development, so if a site is interested in becoming an approved clinical site for us, then the clinical coordinator will review all the paperwork, work with the student intern who's looking at developing that site. They will conduct a site visit, talk with the supervisors, and facilitate kind of just the development before the intern begins, but also throughout the semesters that they're involved. Also maintaining the clinical paperwork. So the clinical coordinator is the one who collects everything and helps manage the database so that all of the accreditation paperwork is in order and collected, and making sure that everything's signed, that the evaluations are reviewed, and if necessary, also reach out to the site supervisors for additional clarity and support. They're also the contact person for the site supervisor questions or concerns during the placements on site. So again, you can reach out to the faculty supervisor for specific student concern, client issues. So contacting the clinical coordinator and letting them be aware of that is very helpful as well. And then, of course, they're making the department head aware of any student issues of concern that might require mediation or additional support. So if this is going to impact their experience in the practicum or internship, if it's going to impact their ability to proceed or their ability to even graduate, then we certainly will get the department head involved as well. So let's take a look at supervision models. From this graphic, you can see that there are a variety of models that will focus specifically on the integrated developmental model. For this model, the authors focused on 3 levels of supervision that move through the levels of the supervisee development as they gain clinical knowledge and experience. And that's levels 1, 2, and 3. So as we look at the integrated development model of supervision, we'll look at each level, but we'll look at it through the structures of development, so looking at that self or other awareness through the cognitive or affective domains, as well as the motivation and autonomy. We'll also take a look at specific domains of clinical activity. So the different levels of student development are expected to be different across these domains of skills and assessment techniques and personal assessment, client conceptualization, theoretical orientation, treatment plans, and ethics. Looking at level 1, some of the general considerations are needing to provide structure and keep anxiety at manageable levels. This is our first semester practicum students. These students have had techniques class, they've learned skills, they've practiced with each other, they've taken a group class, they've led groups, they've participated as a group member, they've had additional courses and skills and looking at ethics and diversity and all of these areas. However, now they're actually going to be working with clients, and so that anxiety level can feel pretty high. And so the client assignments probably want to start with maybe some mild presenting problems, just some maintenance cases, not anything specifically heavy. Now, clearly, crisis cases can come up, but if you start these practicum students with some mild problems, then that might be easier to get them more comfortable and confident with their skills. looking at the interventions that they might do at that level would be more facilitative or prescriptive, and helping them be more conceptual, discussing theoretical approaches that might work with those particular kind of clients. That could be helpful. So many interns at this level are kind of looking at, how can I take this step by step? What do I do when I walk into the client session? And we encourage them to be ready for it to change when they walk into the next client session, but at the same time, many are feeling like they want that kind of black and white step-by-step procedure that feels more prescriptive and more comfortable to them. Some of the mechanisms that can help them work through conceptualizing and looking at things through different approaches, or helping to work with potential client issues, are just going to be the skills training, making sure that they're prepared and that they understand how to do, for example, if they're going to do an empty chair technique, that can feel kind of daunting, and they might have gotten that in their coursework, but how would you do that? And you could do that maybe through role play, kind of reading about that, and then of course monitoring the clients and seeing how that goes with them, talking about it in group supervision, or even bringing a video of something when you've experienced. And then of course just help them address the strengths and weaknesses, and in this level, really the encouragement is to focus on the strengths first. Kind of use that Oreo technique, if you will, like a positive, negative, positive, so that the student who's already kind of feeling unconfident doesn't just take things as critically as it might not sound like that, but they're going to be a little bit more defensive potentially because their anxiety levels are high and they're feeling kind of imposter at this point. So the structures or development really are looking at that cognitive awareness. And so at this point, they can feel confused. They can certainly lack certainty and just not know what to do. They can have a simple client who walks in with just a basic, mild case of sadness or grief after a loss, and they feel like they had an idea what to do, but now they're just completely lost. And so they certainly will rely heavily on the procedures or the rules and not necessarily listen to the clients. And so what they might come in with is a presenting issue, and they'll focus on that, but they're really missing some underlying issues that could be more important. And so they're really concerned more about, how am I going to be seen, especially if they're being videotaped. Some of the Practicum students get a lot more self-conscious, and they're really worried about what the supervisor is going to think, what the client's thinking about them, and how others are going to perceive them. So their affective experience is really performed by, that they're really informed by the perception of faithfully carrying out a technique or strategy. So even if it's not necessarily working in the direction that they thought, they're going to continue to move through it because that's something that they're comfortable with. They've already practiced this technique and they want to push through it versus paying attention to where the client is. And then they might focus on tapping into one's own knowledge. And so, which unfortunately is likely limited. I mean, they've only typically been through 1 year of graduate school. They still have another year to go. Some of them will have completed most of their coursework, but still have very little client experience. They're relying on their knowledge, but that can be limited. And so they're really concerning about this incompetence. They're not sure how they feel about it, and so that might produce some high anxiety. But it can serve to motivate them to continue learning more. So really using that as a way of saying, okay, this didn't work, let's learn more. How can you work with this population? How can you try something different, versus allowing them to feel defeated? And so they can be highly motivated. They want to be the best, or they want to do things right. But obviously, this is typically extrinsically motivated, worrying about what others think about them. And so at this point, making sure that you're guiding them and providing the validation and support, but also some feedback that can help them grow and think about things inside and turn things to be more reflective can be helpful. And so autonomy. At this point, they're very dependent on the supervisor for guidance and structure and kind of just that support on where to go with the client. So they really want additional autonomy. Things might seem to be going okay, but they're still going to continue to fall back on that supervisor. So it's typically fine for a Practicum student to be at this level 1. Hopefully by the end of the Practicum, they're starting to move up to where they're a little bit more comfortable with more autonomy. But at this point, it's pretty natural for them to be at this stage. So level 2, again, this could be towards the end of Practicum, or as you're getting into internship, hopefully they're moving into this direction, and they're going to require less structure. They'll have more autonomy, hopefully because they've gotten familiar with the procedures and the policies and client issues and how to do paperwork and how to conceptualize clients, and they're starting to gain more comfort with that. You can also encourage more autonomy as this as well, and so as people are continuing to ask, you can turn it back on them and ask them, what they think about something, what they think about this conceptualization, or what they think of this potential treatment plan before you actually provide your answers. And then the client assignments might be a little bit more difficult, and so you could have some more severe presenting problems. They might experience a crisis case or two, and some of that could be unexpected, but they can start to handle it more comfortably. And then the interventions, of course, in addition to the facilitative, prescriptive, and conceptual, they can start to experience a little bit more confrontational or countertransference issues. Confronting as in looking at confronting discrepancies, and so working with the interns to get better about that. And also, of course, highlighting countertransference. So you may see them react, they may not even notice it. And so this is, of course, if they're starting to experience countertransference in the early session. In level 1, you definitely want to go ahead and point that out, but here you can be more intentional about working through that. And hopefully, interns are going to be able to address their own countertransference or actually start to notice it as well. And so, and of course, their affective reactions. And so they could be triggered by something, and the more triggered they are, the likely it is closer to their own personal issues and countertransference. So we're really encouraging supervisors to start identifying those and to work more with them, but also encourage the supervisee to see and notice and to address that as well. And of course, you can do that through observation, group supervision, and then just approaching like a broader clientele. And of course, you can continue to use role play and also the parallel process, as in like, okay, so your client's getting triggered at home because of this, but now you're getting triggered by your client because of the same issue. And so looking at that parallel process can be helpful, and also helping them interpret the dynamic between themselves and the clients, as well as between the clients if you're seeing more than one. The self-awareness is looking at that cognitive level. This is maybe starting to release from being self-preoccupied. So maybe their attention is shifting less from how they're doing as a counselor to more about the client. And so they're focusing more on the client's world. And so it can feel overwhelming and confusing because at least they know their world, and they may be able to organize their world in the way they see things. But when they focus on the client, especially if the client's all over the place, they can start to feel overwhelmed and confused because they're not exactly sure where to go or how to conceptualize that. The trainee might work with more complex cases, and it will require them to consider new understandings. And so like the prior approaches that seemed to work in the past, which might be some basic breathing and mindfulness for anxiety, may not work for this particular person who has panic attacks, and so they might need to start addressing some other areas as well and doing more research and ask for more support. So some of the affective awareness needs might be to develop more empathy. So because they're getting out of their own heads and being more focused on the client, they can start to develop more empathy and connect with the client. The emotional experience can be difficult, and so they're able to tap more into that. And it will be important to also help them balance not to take that home as well. And so they might be able to pick up on nonverbal cues and emotion less difficulty, and that might mean that, oh, I noticed that there's some emotion coming up in you, and I see, you know, your face is turning red, and it seems like you might cry, but you're holding back. And allowing those moments to come up and be recognizing. And then also experiencing the client may become overwhelming because, again, when they get sucked into this emotions and they become, some of them might become over-identified with the client emotionally, and it can be hard for them to kind of walk away and not take that home with them at night. So as a supervisor, it's really important to help them understand the balance of becoming empathetic and really identifying with the client, but not so much that it impacts the counselor's personal and professional life. And then, of course, motivation. So as the supervisee is increasing their understanding and they're starting to compare themselves with the peers, they realize that counseling is a lot more complex than they expected. And so the motivation can go in either direction. They might feel more confused and frustrated. And so they're going to be like, I really can't do this. I mean, I suck compared to where everybody else is. And others might say, like, I got this. Okay, it is more complex, but oh my God, there's so much more to learn, and I got to ask so many more people, and I can gain so much more that I've just barely touched the tip of the iceberg. So being aware of where the motivation is, and that confusion and frustration can feel very overwhelming and depleting and discouraging. So making sure that you're helping them navigate through that, but also encouraging them to seek additional guidance when they need, which can also be motivating. And then finally, that sense of efficacy is improving, and they're starting to become more independent as they're becoming more autonomous, and that can be really valuable, especially as they're starting to transition into this level 3 supervision, where most of the structure is provided by the trainee. So hopefully by that final semester of the internship, They're setting up their clients, they're working with the clients, they're conceptualizing the clients, and while as a supervisor you're aware of what's going on, they're leading the process, and you might just be able to give them some slight feedback or adjustments. But they're actually able to say, your client's coming in, I can conceptualize. Here's where it could go, here's some expectations that might be a challenge, here's some potential pitfalls, and they can really focus on the integration fully of their own career and personal decisions. And the hope is that interns are at or near this level, so they'll become prepared to be more autonomous and licensed to practice. So similar interventions from the earlier stages, but maybe more confrontational or conceptual from personal orientation. And that is the personal theoretical orientation, and so getting more focused and narrowed down into what their theoretical orientation is, how they apply it, and how it really fits for the client. So the mechanisms can look like peer supervision, which they'll get throughout the entire year experience, and group supervision, as well as one-on-one. And then they're also striving to integrate their knowledge and skills and experience into what they want to do as a profession. They're going to have more insight, and they're going to have more self-awareness. They're going to start to feel when they're triggered, when their countertransference issues are coming up, and hopefully they will have started to deal with those. Their motivation might be stable and hopefully more intrinsically driven. So they're doing this because they get some internal benefit and motivation out of seeing their clients grow, being able to help their clients. They have greater congruence. They feel more consistent, like comfortable with who they are in this job and their awareness and their synthesis of the information into being able to conceptualize clients and to be able to work with treatment and to be able to find their own place in that, whether they have the knowledge or they need support and consultation in getting that. And then the autonomy, they definitely feel committed to retaining the responsibility for their own clinical work. So when things go well, they can acknowledge their responsibility there, but when things don't, they can also take responsibility for that. And so supervision is more collegial. They'll kind of informing you, here's what's going on, here's where I could use some feedback, but really they are able to take the lead on that and ask for what they need, but also be willing to receive it more as kind of something that they'll be shifting into as a professional, is that peer supervision or the consultation more support. So as you prepare for evaluation, think about applying the integrated developmental model. We just covered one model, but it looks at development across those 3 levels, and hopefully you'll see your practicum and internship students grow through that and kind of see that it's okay that they're high anxiety and low self-efficacy at the beginning, and that they've developed into more autonomy and more confidence at the end. Hopefully that provided you just a brief overview. Also look at your own past experiences with evaluation and supervision. Like, is there anything that might block your facilitation or effectiveness? Is there something that somebody did or didn't do in your own supervision experiences that might have impacted the way you're going to be working with a supervisee? I encourage you to be clear about the expectations, the methods and the process that you're going to use. Use examples. You might want to say, for this supervision time, when you come in, I want you to be prepared with a 10-minute video clip. We're going to take a look at that, and I want you to come up with 3 questions that you want feedback on, but I am going to come up with at least 2 other areas where I think you maybe are not looking, or I'm going to look at other theoretical implications. Or, talk with me about your theory. Why did you approach the client this way? And if you looked at using 1 or 2 other theories, how might you have approached that client? And so giving them ways and a process for what to expect can be really helpful, especially, remember, at that level 1 where they're looking for more and more guidance. Then describe in the behavioral terms how they're going to be evaluated. So they can see the evaluation form, but at the same time, you're going to focus on those objective behaviors, but also you're also looking at the subjective experience of them. And so giving them that feedback on their skills as a counselor versus their personality can be helpful. Now, I realize personality can impact the way a client works with them and sees them. And so if there's a way that they're too harsh and they can soften, or if there's a way that they can, increase their confidence level to better connect with clients, those are behavioral. And so helping them be more specific can be really useful. And then combining those various formats. So I encourage you to do live supervision, to watch them with the client session. And if you don't have the video equipment, you can also sit in and observe in a session. You can ask them to record the videos. You can do co-therapy with them and see how they perform, and explore the different opportunities to see their skills in practice. Consider your own assumptions, attitudes, and beliefs that could be harmful to your supervisors and, of course, your clients, and then help them to see where their assumptions, attitudes, beliefs, and mindsets and potential biases could be harmful to their client. By reviewing their case notes and conceptualization and treatment plans, that will help them meet the site policies, making sure that their notes are done properly, and enhance their intern skills. So if you're at a site where interns are not taking insurance or they're not required to submit paperwork, but really asking them to complete those requirements in line with the policies will help prepare them for getting out into the profession and needing to take site notes somewhere else. Now, notes and paperwork look different in each site, and they're going to have to learn the intricacies of that, but really just the skill of good note taking can be very valuable. And then, of course, welcome opportunities for the supervisee to provide you with both formal and informal feedback. At the end of the semester, they will be able to evaluate you as a supervisor, and they're encouraged to show that to you and get you to sign, but they're not required to, because we also want to give them the opportunity to provide honest feedback, and knowing that there's that hierarchical evaluation period where you might see them over multiple semesters. One potential suggestion is to say, what are 2 things that could go better, and how can I better support you? For the review of recordings, encourage you to discuss your goals and structure for the review. Ask the supervisee to prepare for the review of the video, so ask them to kind of review and pick a 10-minute segment so that they can show you maybe where they're doing well, but also where they're really struggling. And so we really encourage people not just to show where they're doing well, because for supervision, we want to be able to help them grow, and we do this for the group class, and we encourage you as a site supervisor to have them show areas where they're struggling and need more support. I also like the roulette method, where they can come in with a prepared tape, but then I say, okay, let's just kind of roulette and pick a spot in the videotape, and we'll just pop in and watch. Of course, that's going to create a lot of anxiety at the beginning, but then they'll just start getting used to it that, hey, whatever happens, I'm going to get feedback. Hopefully, if it's helpful, then I can grow from that. Also emphasize the training aspect of the review. I can give you feedback. It doesn't mean you're doing it wrong necessarily, unless you're breaking ethical or legal requirements, but you provided this through this theoretical aspect. I'm just going to provide you some other options and directions that you could have gone based on where my thoughts were taking me or where my theoretical lens would take a look at. And then be, of course, respectful of confidentiality. They're going to be your clients, but also when the students are sharing their own countertransference issues and concerns and fears around not only the client but themselves, then please just maintain their confidentiality as well. Stop the video at regular intervals. Instead, if you could watch the whole 10-minute segment, but sometimes if you see something and note something right away, it's helpful to stop it along the way and say, hey, wait, this is a great place for a reflection of emotion. What might you say here? This is a great place to summarize. Or you seem to be getting disconnected from the client because they're rambling. How might you take it in a different direction to go back to the goal and get them off of the storytelling? And then keep the number of critical responses limited, especially in the beginning. Balance with encouragers, like, okay, you're doing this really well, but I also want you to pay attention to this. And that can be helpful so that they don't feel that they're just completely being criticized. And, of course, consider incorporating a variety of modalities to prevent boredom. And that could be from looking at videos to discussing to doing role plays to looking at case notes, and a variety of things can really just help them learn in a lot of different areas. And then act as a consultant to the supervisee. So, again, throughout the week, it doesn't just have to be during consultation or during formal supervision, but they can consult with you for small cases and allow them to bring those cases to you. Of course, address resistance of the client and or the counselor. So while a client may appear to be resistant, kind of address the perspectives of potential resistance and how the counselor might be resisting growth or a particular client because of issues, especially around countertransference. And then at the end of the session, of course, return back to the goal and kind of summarize, like, our goal today was to kind of focus on this, and it looks like we focus on this, and you've got conceptualization, and you've got a treatment plan. Do you feel like you're comfortable going into the next session with this client? Now, what happens if the client comes in with a totally different issue and doesn't want to go in that direction? When we think about treatment planning, obviously it's depending on the supervisee's level of development and their theoretical orientation, the resources that they have situationally, and any of the constraints. And so we'll look at that through the developmental lens, and that might look at when you're treatment planning as a supervisor, of course it's going to be super helpful. But as level 1 supervisees, they're just really going to have difficulty conceptualizing treatment from the intake through termination. So you're going to be expected to have more guidance and support through these level 1 supervisees. And their initial focus might just be on getting clients to return, period, so they have enough hours. But they're likely to develop a treatment plan that's more rigid in nature, maybe coming just directly from the DSM, maybe coming from experience or somebody else, but they're not going to necessarily be paying attention to the relationship that they have. And so what might have worked with one client may not work with this client, but they're really kind of stuck on, hey, this worked, so I need to try it again. And their self-focus may tend to make it difficult to really conceptualize a case because they're so worried about their own performance, so they're not seeing the full case. And this is where these videos can be really valuable, so that you can see things that they're just completely missing. And so helping them develop the basic treatment goals along with their own plans for reducing anxiety. So if they have this plan and then they have an awareness that it could go in multiple directions based on the client needs, then it might help them reduce overall anxiety when they head into the session the next time. For level 2 supervisees, obviously, are a little bit more autonomous. They're more comfortable with some more complex clients. And so as a consequence, they might be overcompensating or over-accommodating to the client's perspective. And now they're a little more empathic and more emotionally connected. So those treatment goals might reflect the initial reasons a client came to therapy. And so they might have connected with the presenting problem versus like the overall conceptualization of the case that the client might not be talking about, but there might be some underlying issues. Say if they're talking about behaviors and triggers, but they're really not getting down to the root of kind of the family of origin issues. How helping the supervisee see kind of the overall conceptualization can be helpful. This is, again, where looking at that, doing the live supervision, co-therapy, or videos can be really helpful to you as a supervisor to be able to really help conceptualize the case. And then as a way to experiment with new treatment modalities, they might lose sight of the necessity of a treatment plan. So they might say, hey, let's try this, let's try that, without a specific treatment plan. And so their treatment goals may be too broad or vague. And so helping them narrow it but widen it in a way that's going to be helpful for the client. And then finally, those level 3 supervisees, hopefully they're kind of at the end. They're much more autonomous, much more comfortable with complex issues and treatment planning, and so they're going to hopefully have a more articulated connection between the assessment and the conceptualization, and of course those treatment plans. And they can create more comprehensive and effective treatment plans, but they've gotten to this point because of your support through the earlier stages. And so helping them understand and conceptualize clients outside their own personal lens, helping them to understand assessment and treatment, helping them develop goals, helping them to actually apply, and to then be willing to assess what went well and what didn't and how it can go for that. That could be really valuable and really helpful for you. So some recommended supervision documentation is we just encourage you as a supervisor to maintain a file. Like that might be your plans and objectives for supervision, taking notes on what they think their goals are and then what you think their goals are and what you might want to accomplish over the course of the semester. And then that allows you to go back and revisit that as well. Maybe an evaluation summary. So look at the dates that you've evaluated them, the methods, procedures, and the forms that you've written for them. The supervision log. So they should be keeping track of the date of the times that they're getting supervision as well. I would encourage you to keep a copy of the signed supervision contract. Once they turn it in and get the additional signatures from their faculty supervisor and clinical supervisor, they get a copy of that back, and you can ask them for a copy of your record since you've signed that contract and you're being asked to be held liable to that. Keep a copy of the graduate requirements. You can just download the Practicum internship manual, and that gives you requirements that are relevant. And of course, the ethical codes. We follow the American Counseling Association Code of Ethics. Looking at the supervisee's job description, I would encourage you to go over this with them very early. Of course, they know that they're going to have direct and indirect hours, but what does their job description look like? What does their hours look like? What is the expectations that you have of them? And being very clear about that, and then pasting that in the file, and maybe even both of you signing it, so that there's no concern or discrepancy later on. You can ask for a copy of their malpractice insurance. We do keep that on file at the university, but you're always welcome to keep a copy of that as well at your practice. And then a sample of the supervisee resume and experiences if you wish. And that may already be a part of the application process. That's up to you. And then a sample of their record keeping and progress notes. So you might have early notes versus later notes to see how they've progressed, or you're able to take a look at those, as well as feedback from the clients about the supervisee. If supervisee has received positive or negative, it could be helpful to make sure that you keep track of that, and then you can even refer to that in your evaluation form, but you can also use that as learning opportunities to support or to help the supervisee grow. So finally, some considerations and pitfalls that you might want to make sure to address. So dual relationships with supervisees is certainly a concern. Obviously, working with friends, confidants, happy hour company, because they, the supervisees are a part of the company or the organization, they're seeing clients, and you might feel like, especially by the end when they're level 3 supervisee, they're more of, consultant peer. It's likely that there will be a dual relationship at some point as you develop and then if you hire them. But at the same time, remember that you are their supervisor, you are evaluating, and you are in a place of power. And then, of course, approving more direct or non-direct hours than the supervisor was actually involved in. They should provide you a list of the logs each week for you to sign, and you're really encouraged to take a look over those hours and make sure that they fit with what you believe they had on site. If you feel like they should have been working more in some areas, refer to that. If you feel like they should be working less in some areas, then certainly talk about that. But do not allow them to tug at your heartstrings that they will not graduate. We will work with them during break periods or allowing them during finals week or whatever to complete their hours to ensure that they graduate on time if they are on track and keep up with us along the way. So if they're a little bit behind, they can work little extra hours, but sometimes site supervisors will approve without looking, and what they're not catching is discrepancies that have been caught later, requiring them to print out all their logs and get them all signed again. And finally, like the supervisees involved with cases that you're not familiar with. So, for example, DID, if you're not familiar with it, you just may need to enhance your own competence or seek additional consultation versus kind of overlooking that. And that can be a challenge when they're looking to us as a supervisor for kind of competent knowledge, but being comfortable with just saying, hey, I don't know, I'm not familiar with those cases, let's go look it up together. Let's look at the DSM, let's do the research together, or send the student out to do a research project on it to gain more information and come back and teach you and or the other staff about that. So finally, I want to go over just some brief ethical issues in supervision. These are all taken as a summary from the ACA Code of Ethics in Section F, which focuses on supervision training and teachers. So the supervisors, you're really strongly encouraged to become familiar with the entire Code of Ethics. However, these are really focused specifically on the supervision experience. So looking at moral principles to support ethical, this is just in the preamble. A reminder that respect for autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, justice, fidelity, veracity, and respect for persons and self-care are the things that are important in ethical behavior. So making sure that your students are aware of these, they've been taught these academically, but making sure that they're actually practicing. So non-maleficence is doing no harm, but also beneficence is doing good. So not just avoiding intentional harm with the client, but also providing services that are beneficial is going to be important. And of course, treating others fairly, being trustworthy and honest, honoring the client's rights and taking care of themselves. They're all important pieces to becoming a competent counselor. And so making sure that they're managing these as well as managing them in your own practice. And so some of the basic ethical decision-making tests can be publicity, like would I want my actions reported by the press, and universality. Could you recommend the action to other professionals in similar situations, or would you apply this to all clients if you were going to do it for one? And so if you would allow clients to call you after hours, would you allow all your clients, or is it just this one? So let's look at section F1. So counselor supervision and client welfare. I'm just going to highlight these. You can always stop the tape and read them more detail or pull up the Code of Ethics. But really, the supervisors are supposed to meet regularly with supervisees to review their work and help them become prepared to serve a range of clients. They work to ensure they communicate their qualifications. And again, this is going to be an informed consent, making sure that their clients know interns under supervision. And then making sure that supervisees are aware of client rights and that they're also respecting those client rights and maintaining the limits of confidentiality and letting the clients know when they're going to have to break that confidentiality. So section 2 is focusing on the counselor supervision competence. And so they want to make sure that counselors are trained in supervision methods and techniques. So this is just a brief overview and a touch into one of the models, but you can certainly spend a lot more time. There's full classes, there's 15-hour programs at the state that you can spend more time looking at training and supervision methods and techniques. And the counseling supervisors are also aware and address the role of multiculturalism and diversity in the supervisory relationship. So addressing your own biases and beliefs and how that impacts your work with the supervisee, but also impacting the supervisees and looking at their cultural and multicultural biases and potentially roadblock. And then, of course, when using technology, being competent in those areas. Looking at the supervisory relationship, they want to make sure that you're maintaining ethical, professional, personal, and social relationships with supervisees and the proper boundaries so that judgment's not. Sexual or romantic relationships are prohibited between supervisees just like they are with clients. Of course, the counseling supervisors do not condone sexual harassment, and supervisors are prohibited from engaging in relationships where they're not able to remain objective. So no friends, family members. Some responsibilities would be to make sure that you go over informed consent and participation in supervision, just like you would do it within the counseling setting. Making sure that there's an alternative on-call supervisor to assist crisis in the event that the supervisor is not available or on site while the counselor is seeing clients. And that the supervisors make their supervisees aware of the ethical and legal standards and responsibilities. Now, they are academically taught, but again, sometimes when you get into an environment with the client, then these need to be reminded and refreshed, especially as they pertain to a specific individual case. And finally, supervisors or supervisees have the right to terminate the supervisory relationship with adequate notice, and then making appropriate referrals to other supervisors. So this, within the internship experience, should not be done without consulting the faculty supervisor and the clinical coordinator, because it's going to be expected that we're going to be having to work with you and work with the counselor to make sure that they get into another arrangement with a qualified site supervisor. Issues related to that should come through the university. Finally, the student supervisee responsibilities are that they have a responsibility to understand and follow the ACA Code of Ethics. They're all taught the ACA Code of Ethics, but I really want you to think about how they're applying it within that setting, within those particular case issues. When it seems black and white, but when they get into it, they don't really want to have a duty to report because they don't want to get the counselor or the client in trouble. There can be real concerns, and so hopefully they'll be focusing and sharing that information with you and discussing it. So supervisees should also monitor themselves for the signs of impairment and notify their faculty supervisors and seek assistance for problems. So I want you to think about how will you notice the red flags and what will they be, and so what will you do. So think about, and you can even ask the supervisees, what are your red flags? How do I know when you're not taking care of yourself? How do I know when you're getting burnt out? How do you know? And so helping them kind of see those red flags could be really valuable. And of course, because we want to look at that in ourselves as well. And so also before providing services, disclosing their status as supervisees and explaining how that status affects the limits of confidentiality. If they're going to be videotaped, they're going to be seen by not only the supervisor, but potentially the supervision class and the group supervisor and the clinical coordinator if necessary. So consider role-playing this with your supervisee and like what can supervisees share in their academic settings, and you can help guide them and talking with their clients about that. And finally, looking at section F includes that supervisors will document and provide supervisees with ongoing feedback regarding their performance, and so those are the midterm and final evaluation. But consider sharing your feedback with supervisees throughout the supervision, not just those midterm and final evaluation. And so if you can start giving them that feedback along the way, they won't be surprised to see it in writing. So you also want to make sure that you're aware of the supervisee limitations that might impede their performance. So if necessary, then you could recommend dismissal from the training programs, but certainly seek consultation with the university staff, the group supervisors and the clinical coordinator, and then document your decision. If supervisees request counseling, make sure that you can help them get appropriate services that really don't impact that dual relationship. So just be careful of the dual relationship. Sometimes it's hard for counselors to find other counselors in the community and avoid those dual relationships, but asking for referrals can be a great way to do that. And finally, the supervisor should endorse supervisees for their certification or licensure, employment, and or completion of their training program only when you believe that they're qualified for endorsement. And so if you do not feel like they're qualified, I encourage you to discuss this early on. There have been students that might have gotten to the end of graduation and tried to apply for licensure and asking for the endorsement, and supervisors had said that they haven't felt comfortable yet. They've not said anything, or they've just kind of been blown away because there's new issues that have come up that did not come up in supervision. So really, I encourage you to be talking about these things along the way so that if a student gets to this point, they're not surprised. So that brings us to the end of this supervisor training. I thank you for being an integral part of our counseling program's supervised clinical experience. So if you have questions or concerns throughout your time working with us, please do not hesitate to reach out to the clinical coordinator at the email listed here. This Gmail address allows us to receive large student clinical portfolios over 10 megabytes where the university email blocks them. So if you've noticed it's not WKU, that's the reason. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out along the way, and a copy of this PowerPoint will be posted along with this presentation. Thank you very much.